my job to speak on behalf of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, but I think, like most Australians and most Australians, we expect our parliamentarians and government to stand up for our national interests, and we won't be intimidated as a nation by any other country in standing up for our national interest and the health and well-being of the global community. The reality is the government has simply asked that we have an independent investigation into the source and origins of coronavirus. It was only a few weeks ago that the Chinese government or Chinese sources were alleging that it came from the United States. So nobody should have anything to fear from an independent investigation, because this isn't just about nations. It's actually about the health and well-being of the global community.
Was the Chinese ambassador out of line?
Well, the Chinese ambassador can, of course, say whatever he wants, but we can also respond in kind, and obviously departments can ask questions. But the reality is Australia will not be intimidated out of standing up for our national interest or for the global community and the health and well-being of the global community. We're a strong, proud, independent nation, and we won't back down. Was
it a serious threat, do you think, for people not to buy our beef and not buy our wine, or was it a bit of posturing, do you think? Because, there seems to be a growing amount of support behind these calls for an independent inquiry.
Well, I'm not going to seek to interpret what the Chinese ambassador has said. He can answer for himself.
Yeah.
But yes, there is international community support for these types of measures for precisely the reasons that I've outlined. I mean, we have other countries also wanting to know what the source and origins of this virus is. It has a big impact on our health and security as a globe. Obviously, the consequences of not identifying it leaves us open to the risk and exposure of further viruses. So proper action needs to be taken. Proper action needs to be taken in terms of investigation to the conduct of the World Health Organization, as well as other countries, in making sure that we know how best to respond to these events.
Okay, so what sort of, how should you be looking in, or how should our government be looking into the World Health Organization? Is reform needed there? I mean, Dave Sharma was on our show a couple of weeks ago suggesting that reform is needed there.
Well, I think we're all open to a discussion around what needs to be done. But as a middle power, Australia's job is at the table leading the discussion, the dialogue with other allied countries around making sure that WHO is doing its job. After the SARS crisis in the early 2000s, there was a significant effort to reform the international health regulations to make sure that WHO was doing its job, as were countries in reporting data to the WHO. Now we need to make sure that WHO has not become captured by individual governments and is doing its job in investigation. The PM has outlined or flagged possible measures around investigation, and I think we need to have that discussion within the WHO and with allied countries.
Okay, Tim, just on to economic matters closer to home now. There's another $100 million that'll be given out today to, to zoos and aquariums, places that have been hit hard, amongst all of the other places that have been hit hard during this crisis. I mean, is it your expectation that we will hit $1 trillion in debt?
I don't want to speculate on where we're going to get to as a country, because the focus right now is making sure we can support Australians who have either lost their jobs and those who we can, keeping them in their jobs. And the best pathway out of this economic crisis that's stemmed from the COVID-19 pandemic is to make sure that we have people back in work as quickly as possible, so that they can be standing on their own 2 feet, contributing to the tax base, so that we can manage debt and pay it down. The challenge we face as a country is not unique, but we are in a better position than most other countries because we went into this crisis with a lower level overall of debt in comparison to many other countries. But we're also in the best position to then be able to grow the economy and pay debt back down.
There's so many calls for economic reform now. Do you think that's what's needed, and what shape should that take?
Peter, I thought there was a case for economic reform before the COVID-19 pandemic. So, unsurprisingly, I'm even more enthusiastic than I was.
Okay, we'll single out some parts of reform.
Well, I've been consistent in arguing that there's a case for tax reform, but it's about seriously looking at the fundamental problems in the structure of our tax base. We draw too much from company and income tax as a federal government. The states draw too much from stamp duty. So obviously we need to look at how to rebase the tax system. And it's not just across the events of today, meaning how we're raising money today, but also across the life cycle, which is looking at who's paying what taxes at what stage of life. Everybody has to share the cost and burden of carrying our society, and it's making sure that everybody feels and is a participant.